You might be wondering, what does Nova Scotia have to do with Western New York? Well, we're going to find out in a moment on this week's episode of the State of Greater Western New York Report, which, as always, is brought to you by...
Each week, our community makes history. Each week, you make history. And each week, there's only one source to turn to for the first take on history. You know what that is? Subscribe to the Sentinel right now to discover the history being made in your own backyard.
The Linden Honey Falls Lima Sentinel. More than just your news, it's your history. Welcome, everyone, to this edition of the State of Greater Western New York Report. Join us each episode as we discuss fantastic topics ranging from history to science to the strange and the wonderful, as well as the treasured spirit with which our region has infused America. We challenge you to consider all things Greater Western New York, from our region's very beginnings to how it inspires, how it empowers, and why it is so admired. Here's the host of the State of Greater Western New York Report, Chris Carosa.
Hey there, and welcome everyone to this week's edition of the State of Greater Western New York Report. I am Chris Carosa. With us today are two rather interesting fellows. I'm going to get right into the introductions of them. I'll let them tell you a little bit about themselves. So let's start out with Doc Hamels. He's actually the historian of the town of Ripley. So Ripley is right on the border of Pennsylvania in Chautauqua County. So, Doc, tell us a little bit about your background, including how you got to be called Doc.
Okay, well, Ripley is the last exit on the thruway before you hit Pennsylvania. I was a special education teacher. I came from Buffalo. I went to the same school as your mother, as it turns out, upstate. Went on to become a teacher here in Chautauqua County, an administrator, and I retired as a school superintendent of Ripley. I'm Doc because I have a PhD in education, and it kind of stuck with me with my staff.
Very good. And now we have Jim McQuiston. You are also a bit of a historical researcher. I almost said hysterical researcher, although I guess sometimes the topics that you're looking at might be hysterical. Jim is from Northeast Pennsylvania, and ironically, Northeast Pennsylvania is in northwestern Pennsylvania, but it's on the other side of the border. In fact, a little over 200 years ago, where Jim is from was part of New York State, which is actually probably an interesting topic for a future show. But Jim, tell us a little bit about yourself and how you ended up doing what you're doing.
Well, I've been a writer and interested in history for a long, long time. And back in 2014, I actually was honored with a fellowship with the Society of Antiquaries of Scotland, based on a lot of writing, books, and online about Scottish history. And I happen to be related to a man who is what's known as the premier Knight Baronet of Nova Scotia. And so I started watching the Curse of Oak Island show, really because I wanted to see the big equipment they were bringing in, how they were bulldozing and drilling and all that. That's what interested me. But I was watching it one night and I thought, wow, Oak Island, Nova Scotia, Knight Baronet of Nova Scotia, do they have anything to do with each other? This was in November of 2016. So I got an email address and I emailed them. Next thing I know, they're on the phone with me for an hour asking all kinds of questions. We traded emails, probably 100 or more emails. And they said, you have to write a book because all of this is going to get lost in our emails. And it's a lot of good research. So I did, and then they had me come up there to be on the show, and we were working on some projects in this research that warranted a second book at their suggestion, and I wrote the second book, and I was up in 2017, and then by this point, I had found enough information that I knew I had to write the third book, and what has happened is that the story just keeps ballooning and more people involved and more history nailed down. So the sum total so far has been 10 books on Oak Island and one book just specifically on the travels of families and traditions through the Knights Templar and the Knights of Malta, through these Knights Baronet of Nova Scotia, and eventually to Freemasonry. So about 5 books ago, maybe, Doc had been having me on his Chautauqua Sunrise show. And so I knew he had a lot of interest in it. So I would started asking him questions, and I'd send him files, and I'd say, "What do you think of this? What do you think of that?" And we would end up what we joked about, going down rabbit holes. He'd go down his rabbit hole, I'd go down another. We'd put the information together. So he helped me along in the last few books, and I decided I can't write any more books on Oak Island, although I might write one more. But we decided that we should have this online where we could update it all the time. We could show a lot of color photos. We could let people comment and all that. So a little over a year ago, we started our YouTube show called Oak Island Plus, and we broadcast one every month, although one time we had to do 2 because we had so much information. What you see on the screen right now, that was our most popular show, episode 13 with Laird Niven. He's one of the team members on Oak Island, and that garnered over 21,000 views already. It's only been on 2 months, and it was by far our best show as far as numbers go, but it was a good show otherwise too, because Laird is not a part of the team up there he's a part of the team in a different way. He works for the government, and he's there to make sure archaeology is done right. So he was candid with a lot of what he told us that you would not have probably got from the other team members, because he has no dog in that fight. He's just trying to do his job for the government. So anyway, we've been having fun with the show. We had the first year we had to finish it with a 2-part episode because we had so much information. Then we started out again, and we did a little catch-up episode. So even though we say we're on episode 14 right now, we've actually filmed 16 episodes. And Doc can tell you a little bit about how we go about filming it all. But I just want to say that I'm up on the island at least 15 days. I've been in the 6 war rooms, they call them, where you sit around with the team and discuss things. And I've been on a couple Zoom meetings with them. And I've been on the History Channel through their show about 13 times. I also have been in the top 10 theories for the last 3 years in a row. At one point, I got all the way up to the 2nd place. And I never know where I'll be, because it is a lot of it's a one-way street. I mean, they're asking questions and I'm answering as best I can, but they're not telling me, "Hey, guess what we're doing now?" They don't tell me that, So the only time I really find out is if I get to go up there and they let me go around. And every time I do, I have to sign an NDA, which promises my firstborn child and everything else, So it's only good for till the shows air, and then I can say what I want after the shows air. So
good. So you can reveal secrets to us today.
Oh,
before we get into the actual mechanics of the show, why don't you tell us a little bit about Nova Scotia, pinpointed on the map, so everyone who's watching can be absolutely sure that they know what we're talking about.
All right. So the first map over on the right-hand side is kind of gold colored. It looks like a little strip of land. It looks like an island, but it's not. It's actually connected to the mainland right there. But that is Nova Scotia. And above it, there's a pink area. That's Newfoundland and Labrador. And that's where you would normally get to first coming over from the British Isles. But it's very cold up there, and there's not a lot of vegetation and all that. So people would move on down to Nova Scotia. So it was one of the main colonies that was first settled. In fact, they wanted it to be part of the United States. There was quite a bit of political and physical battling over that. But it has one of the longest histories in North America of French and English or Scottish, particularly. And so it was a hub for people to come to and then to spread out, either going down to Cape Cod and Plymouth Colony or down to Virginia and even down to the West Indies, or to come up the Gulf of St. Lawrence and into the Great Lakes. So this particular shot is overhead of Nova Scotia, and there are three dots. They actually are pretty close to the 45th parallel, and we've found out why, because that is mentioned in a number of charters. But the first dot, number 1, that's where Oak Island is. It's in that bay there called Mahone Bay. And it's one of 365 islands, but it's pretty unique in the way it's laid out. And right up above it, between 17 to 20 miles in that range, is a town called New Ross, used to be called Charing Cross. And there's an old foundation up there that nobody's quite figured out, unless my research is correct. And then across the way to the other side at number 3, that's Port Royal. And that's where the French first settled, and that's where the Scots first settled. And the reason being that it's a lot calmer over there. That's the leeward side. Like on the Atlantic side, it's all, you can just tell by the coastline how rough it is. So they would settle over on that side. Right across that little stretch of water there, that's called the Bay of Fundy, you'd get to, heading up a little north, you'd get to New Brunswick. Heading a little south, you'd get to Maine. So it's almost on the border of Maine and New Brunswick. All that was part of the original Nova Scotia. But through the years, it got pieced down to what you see right now.
Well, let's focus in on Oak Island. So this is that small island. Go back to this map here just to give you a sense where it's just that number 1. Now, you can barely make it out in this map, but if you zoom in, this is what it looks like. And tell us about what the arrows are pointing to here.
Okay. Well, first of all, you'll notice it looks like a little elephant. Everybody kind of jokes about that. But the biggest point there is the money pit, and that was discovered in 1795. It's been dug ever since, but it's disappeared because they drill so many holes and dig so many holes, people forget where the original was. So the current team is somewhat on a search just to locate the original shaft. But that hole, there's a hill there. You can't really tell on this, but it's somewhat of a hill. And that's been drilled about 400 times just by the current team, and probably at least 600 times over its lifespan. So, it's basically Swiss cheese. And that's the only spot on the island where the current team can dig without an archaeological oversight, which would be Laird Niven, who we interviewed. At Smith's Cove, it's a little cove or bay off to the right. They've found a lot of things built underground there. They don't know if they were break walls or what. There's a lot of mystery there. And they found items there. And then the swamp, they found a lot of items too. And that road that goes along the swamp there, that wasn't there until the 1930s. So that swamp could have just been a cove also that was being fed with fresh water out of springs or rainwater and then salt water out of the ocean. But they put a road across there to get around the island better. And they found a lot of artifacts in there. One thing that happens is that this tide comes in 5 to 6 feet a day, plus they get a lot of storms and even a few hurricanes. And so items come up and wash on the mainland, which would be across the bottom of this picture, and they wash back. So I believe, and so does Laird, that a lot of items they find in the swamp are flotsam off other shipwrecks and maybe off shorelines or whatever. But there is no doubt that something big happened there, because there are a lot of items been found what they call at depth, from 90 foot to 100 and some feet, including a couple human bones, tools, remnants of gold and silver, So something happened big. And so the hunts changed from just going there and hoping to find a treasure chest to hoping to find out what the heck went on Oak Island.
All right. Well, let's. We're going to take a quick break here. When we come back, Doc, you'll have to tell us a little bit about the logistics of the show, because it's always, people are always interested in what's behind the curtain, and maybe you can tell us a little bit about that. Then we'll get into some of the stuff that you've uncovered on your show. All right. We'll be back right after this message.
Through the mists of time, nature and man have both created and buried treasures beyond the imagination. With the ages, these riches slowly dissolve into mere myths until they are forever forgotten. But there are those brave souls who tirelessly cling to the truth, ever seeking to discover the undiscovered, to reveal what has always been there, to uncover the hidden gems of a land thought forsaken but loved by millions. 50 Hidden Gems of Greater Western New York. Discover the secrets in your own backyard. Buy your copy now at 50hiddengems.com.
Well, welcome back, everyone. We're here today with two folks who are really into the mystery of Oak Island. They have a podcast, and Doc, if you could tell us a little bit about how you got into this podcasting aspect. I mean, I think, if I remember correctly, this is your particular expertise that came in. You had been doing shows, right? And then you decided to do this with Jim. Tell us a little bit about how it works, how you got there and how it works.
Well, the long story short is I've just completed 10 years of broadcasting out of Mayville, New York on Access Chautauqua. It's a cable TV show, and it's called Chautauqua Sunrise. And so after 10 years of interviewing well over 500 people, I kind of got this thing figured out. Then Jim has been on my show 3 or 4 times, and as Jim said, he started sending me stuff. And we said, whoa, there's a lot of stuff here we got to talk about. And we sat down one day, and we had this big board, and we put all these different things on the board. And then we realized we have a story here we got to tell. And we started talking about doing another podcast, and neither one of us actually had done a podcast on YouTube. Well, as it turns out, I'm involved with a group called the Lakeshore Center for the Arts in Westfield, and they have a studio. And we learned very quickly how to use software packages to produce video work and how to edit it. And Jim and I go up there, and we have our cameraman, Randy Burt, and from my other studio, and Jackie Phelps, who is the director of the innovation studio there, she helped us get started. And after 1 hour of lessons, we just sort of figured things out by ourselves. And now here we are 16 videos later, 55,000 views, and it's working.
It's amazing how something like this could take off. Now, you've got an audience that's really, I would almost say, worldwide, correct? It's
absolutely from all different countries all across the United States.
Yeah, I mean, as Jim was saying, this is a subject that really has a compelling interest among many. In terms of what you've uncovered in the show, well, let's talk about the show that was most popular. What do you think made it so interesting to the viewers? What were some of the facts that were revealed?
Let me jump in first, and Jim, you jump right after me. How's that? Okay, so the bottom line is this, Chris. Jim and I do historical research. We look for the least common denominator, if you will, of what is the story behind whatever it is we're discussing. Rather than coming up with myths and legends, we get the facts, and that's what all our shows are about. When we did Laird Niven, we talked about what did you find, what's it connected to, and here's the research behind it. Take it away, Jim.
Yeah, that's true. I think one of the reasons it was as popular as it was is because Laird is a member of the team. And, I think he's fairly well respected because he's a quiet man, but he holds his own when they are in the meetings. He doesn't mind saying, oh, you can't do that according to the archaeological law, that kind of stuff. So I think people wanted to hear what is Laird going to actually tell us? And he did tell us some good stuff. Overall, like Doc said, our goal was kind of to take one subject at a time and give it an hour at least, or right around an hour, although we've had an hour and a half show, I think was our longest, and we had a two-part show, I guess would really be the longest. But rather than jump around and we're digging here and then we're talking there and whatever, we just sit there and talk, and we show slides like we've shown on your show here. But we dig down deep and we get primary sources, which what that is that if it's contemporaneous writing, in other words, somebody wrote the king, or the king wrote somebody and said, I want you to do this, or there's a ship record that they left on a certain date, or they arrived on a certain date, or if a group of people were arrested on a certain date. Deeds are another one. What does the deed actually say? So that's what we go for, is what we call real history. I mean, we're not ditzing anybody else, but we're going with what you could prove. If somebody took us into a court of law and say, prove your show, we would gather all that stuff together and say, this is where we found it. And I loved your little promo that you had in there, because literally that's what everybody's doing. We're digging in books and documents, and on Oak Island, they're digging in the ground, but everybody's looking for that elusive buried treasure. And where we come on our show is that, well, actually in all my books and the show, generally speaking, although we branch out, is that there was a group of what we call a multi-generational group of elites who were in a conspiracy to have a better life, basically in any way that they could. But one of the main ways was to get out of Dodge and get over to the New World, where there was a lot of free lumber and beaver pelts and potentially gold and silver and all that, as opposed to back home where there were plagues and religious wars and you could get your head lopped off. You could be the king's best friend on paper one day, and the next day get thrown in the Tower of London, and the next day get your head cut off. And so these guys were like, "This is stupid. We got to get out of here. We got to." So
well, one of the things that I'm wondering is, we have just a few minutes left, so very quickly, because this isn't a question that we got from the audience. Can you kind of summarize a couple of the stories, not necessarily your story? I want you to do that in a second, but tell us a little bit about the pirates angle and then the Knights Templar. Very quickly, we can't get into it deeply. People will have to go to your podcast to get the full story, but just give us like the thumbnail version of it.
Well, we don't speak of pirates specifically, but the family that was involved, basically the Alexander family, they have been called pirates in books on piracy. And but they were essentially, William Alexander was given Nova Scotia. He was also given Manhattan, and he was part of the Plymouth colony. He was a big dude. And but as far as the Templars go, all these people that are in our elite conspiracy, most of them had links back to the Templars. And Alexander, for instance, he was born on Templar land. His sons became the first Freemasons. His partner, who robbed a giant treasure that's never been figured out, became one of the first Freemasons. So there's an absolute direct link from the legacy of the Knights of Malta and the Knights Templar to the Knights of Nova Scotia, and then to Freemasonry beginning in 1634. And it's all highly, highly documented. I mean, again, I have 11 books right now, plus we have 15, 16 different shows, So if anybody wants to know, all they got to do is read books or watch our shows, and they'll get the gist of the whole thing.
Go
Chris,
ahead,
if
Doc.
I can jump in real quick, we have a database that we developed over the last 3 or 4 years that shows a column for Templar Knights, and then their kids that became Knights Baronet of Nova Scotia, not their kids, but their descendants, and their descendants became Freemasons, and those Freemasons are around today. And we've got this continuum right across that we're showing this connection. And what we're doing, and you'll see in the show with Laird, he actually says we're telling the history that no one's talking about. They don't even teach it in school. There's missing about 150 years of history that we talk about, and it explains a lot of the artifacts that they're finding.
Why do you think they don't teach that in school?
It's too controversial.
What's that? Oh, too controversial. Okay.
Yeah, the indigenous people were a group called the Mi'kmaq, and then the French were there. There's some indication that the Basque and the Portuguese were fishing the shoreline. Then the Scots came in, the French came back, then the English came in. Well, anytime you're trying to celebrate one of those, you're making everybody else mad because, the indigenous people have a certain amount of animosity about getting, their land taken over. The French and the English all through Canada still have, they want to keep separate languages. It's still not, peace has not been made there. So even when in 2021 would have been the 400th anniversary of the naming of Nova Scotia, they didn't even have a celebration because that was the name of the Scots. So if you celebrated that, you were celebrating the Scots and you were ignoring the Mi'kmaq or the French or anyone else. So it's a touchy subject, controversial. And that's why I believe anyway, that's why a lot of archaeology doesn't take place, because you start digging up a site thinking it's Scottish, let's say, and then you run into Mi'kmaq, which is exactly what happened on Oak Island. It shut most of Oak Island down for a long time. They had to have archaeologists come in and they have to negotiate with the Mi'kmaq tribe and with the government. It's a can of worms that you're opening up when you're trying to do that. But as Laird admitted to us in that show, it stifles historic research in Nova Scotia because of these strict rules that they have. And I know it can upset him at times because they find something neat on Oak Island and bam, the government swoops in and shuts it down until there's some kind of a study or permission or whatever. And so it's, and because it is so old, this is, there aren't a lot of places in America that have that old of a history. Virginia colony would be one, but it disappeared. Nova Scotia didn't. So it got built on and built on and built on and built on. And so it makes it a little touch and go there.
So everybody wants to know, what is this curse that's associated with Oak Island?
Well, it only came about in 1967. In 1965, a family was there, and the father and one son and two workers died in a shaft from some type of a gas. And the girlfriend of one of those men, 2 years later, a journalist was there from True Magazine, and he was interviewing her, and she made the comment, how many people have to die? Or do 7 people have to die? Because up at this point, there were 5. She said, do 7 people have to die before they quit looking for treasure on that cursed island? Well, being a journalist, a magazine like True Magazine, he went back and called it the Curse of Oak Island. Later, it got picked up in Rolling Stone magazine and was again called the Curse of Oak Island. So they start to show up with that all the time, that 7 must die. They can pinpoint 7 have died. But there's been a lot of people that were looking for treasure there that have died, hundreds of them, literally, over the 200 something. So it's really,
Well, we have about a minute left, and I wanted just to know what can you summarize what your theory is? And again, people will have to go watch your show to really get into the details of it. But just give us a quick overview of what it is.
Well, this gentleman stole a giant treasure. He was pardoned completely and made a partner of William Alexander in Nova Scotia. The treasure was never accounted for. At the time, both kings in a row, King James and King Charles, were desperate for money. Even the man that was given Nova Scotia was desperate for money. We have all kinds of primary source documents about that. We think that that money was taken to Nova Scotia to finance a new country there, a new world, and that when a treaty was signed with the French and they had to leave in a hurry in the middle of storms because it was early April. And we think that they pulled into Mahone Bay, which is the largest bay on that side, buried the treasure, and left for England. Well, why they didn't come back? Everybody wants to know why they didn't come back. Because the French took over Nova Scotia. They didn't want to reveal their hand there with the treasure. And in Great Britain, the Civil War took over. And people were getting tortured and murdered right and left. And everything just fell apart. And so it took time for things to heal and for Great Britain to get control of Nova Scotia again so that these people could come back. And they came back in a big way, not only as governors of Nova Scotia and New Brunswick and all that, but also landowners on Oak Island,
Do you
which
know?
is really a
Yeah,
coincidence.
do you know where the treasure was stolen from?
Yes, it was a man named George Keith. He was the Marshal of Scotland. His family, it was a hereditary title, so they had been able to amass tons of money. And one of the things was coinage was in short supply for a number of reasons, but he had tons of it. The record of the treasure is just a lot of it's just about boxes full of coins and everything. And so it came from probably a lot of people that passed away and the marshal was there and took their money or whatever way he got the treasure. But it was considered the largest treasure in Scotland at the time. And I estimate it to be about 3 billion trying to use currency calculators, which is difficult. But then I read some other guy writing about it and he jumped it up to 4 billion. So we really don't know, but zero of it has been accounted for. And
Well,
I've talked to a lot of people in Scotland, the museum, the historic people, nobody knows what happened.
maybe what you guys ought to do is pitch this as National Treasure Part 3. It has all the elements there. Thank you for being here. Thank you all
Thanks,
for
Chris.
watching. If you want to be a member of the live audience, that's the only way to ask questions. Just go to stateof.greaterwesternewyork.com. Sign up there for free. You'll be put on a list, and every Thursday morning, you'll get the super secret link on how to be a member of the live audience. Now, I realize that a lot of people work at noon on Thursdays, so go to stateofgreaterwesternewyork.com. You'll be able to watch this show there, these shows, all of them, in our archive. Just look it up there. And if you really want to watch it sort of live, then I guess you can go to our Facebook page or YouTube channel and sign up there. The show is rebroadcast every Sunday at 1:30, and those platforms will notify you when it airs. That's all for this week. Thanks again for being here. We'll see you all next week. Bye-bye for now.
Thanks, Chris.